Distinguished delegates, I would like to call this meeting to order. Dear colleagues, good morning, good day, and good afternoon. Good time of a day. It's a pleasure to be with you today to continue to chair this session on Agenda Item 7 on capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, knowledge management, and communications, which we began yesterday. Before I reopen the floor for statements, I will give the floor to the Secretariat for some technical reminders. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, good afternoon, and good day, everyone. I would like to remind participants of some technical matters. When the Chair invites for interventions, if you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will be entered in the queue list visible to the Chair. When the Chair gives you the floor, the moderator will activate your microphone. The status bar will turn red on your computer and you may start to speak immediately. If the Chair gives you the floor to speak and you have not raised your hand, please press the raise hand button so the moderator can see you on the list and activate your microphone. If any party encounters connectivity issues that prevent them from making their statement, they should contact the Secretariat to make alternative arrangements. We would also like to remind participants that the chat box is for brief communication and therefore keep your remarks here short. The time for statements is limited to 3 minutes for parties, 5 minutes for regional groups. A clock is provided for you on the screen to help you manage your time, but please do not speed up your reading, as it will be challenging for interpreters to follow you. Please note that towards mid-session, the Chair will announce a 15-minute break. There is no need to log off during this time. The CBD Secretariat has developed an online application that allows countries and organizations to upload their statements to the meeting page. It is highly recommended that participants use this tool instead of emailing their statements, as it helps streamline the meeting process and facilitates the work of the interpreters. We will still, however, monitor the email address statements@cbd.int. Uploading instructions were included in your priority pass email along with your dedicated link, which leads you directly to the upload page. A 6-minute instructional video explaining both how to upload statements and how our online conference system works is being played at break time, as well as just before we convene each morning. Please be sure to include the name of your country and organization and the agenda item on the first page of the statement that is uploaded. Participants are encouraged to allow their statements to be posted on the meeting page. With regard to the uploading of statements, we note that some parties and regions are still not uploading their statements in advance of delivery. We sincerely request that for the sake of effective interpretation, that you upload your statements before you request the floor. The interpreters are having difficulty owing to the various challenges posed by working in virtual settings. Rest assured that your statement will not be made public until after delivery. Please note that statements will be posted online on the meeting page once they have been delivered by the respective parties and registered observers, subject to the agreement of the parties and observers concerned. The website will be updated accordingly each day. Statements will not be posted in advance of delivery. However, once the agenda item is completed, in the case that not all statements of observers are presented orally because of lack of time, those statements that have been provided in good time will be posted again, subject to the agreement of the observer concerned. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. Yesterday, we reached the end of a list of parties that raised their hand on this item, but I will still ask if, just to be sure that if there were any other parties who did not speak yesterday, they could raise their hand now. No, I see no raised hand. We'll then turn to non-parties and then to major groups and finally statements from observers. I now open the floor for interventions on agenda item 7 on capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, knowledge management and communication. I will now like to see if there are any non-parties who would like to speak. No, not non-party. I would now like to open the floor to interventions by representatives of major stakeholder groups. Please note each statement should not exceed 5 minutes. Thank you. So on behalf of IPLCs, I have here on my list Kurimales or Andechin. Maybe Secretary can help me which organization for IPLCs. Okay, I think that's clear. So you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Madam Chair. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Wonderful. Good morning. IPLC's livelihoods depend on Mother Earth, healthy ecosystems, and sustainable and harmonious relationships. We have systems and different spiritual values, rituals, and customs that are deeply rooted with Mother Earth. Indigenous values are associated with inclusive conservation, customary sustainable use, indigenous agriculture systems, food systems, traditional land occupations, wildlife ecosystems, sacred landscapes, marine landscapes, medicine, and genetic and biological resources. The spiritual connection with Mother Earth is vital to the cultural survival and the transfer of knowledge to young generations to achieve a life in harmony with Mother Earth through the theory of change. We are the guardians of agrobiodiversity and the species that were domesticated, adapted, and diversified by our ancestors. IPLCs have not only been holders of traditional knowledge, but also have developed innovations and technologies. We have been nurturing the living ecosystems on site through our customary and sustainable practices for thousands of years. So we believe it is essential that traditional knowledge systems of IPLCs be considered in the design and implementation of the Biodiversity Capacity Development Action Plan within a framework of human rights, safeguards, and precautionary mechanisms. For Agenda Item 7, the IIFB makes the following recommendations. Capacity building, communication, knowledge and transformation management, cooperation and the transfer of technology and knowledge must be inclusive, participatory, and collaborative with indigenous sciences and values. It must consider the socio-economic reality, orality, ways of life management and transmission, traditional lifestyles, languages, and human rights of IPLCs and those of Mother Earth, and should use culturally appropriate tools, methodologies, and resources. Establish a capacity building system in coordination with IPLCs and other agencies, governments, and institutions that have experience with IPLCs to define relevant lines of action for local, national, and regional capacity building. Consider the collaboration of the United Nations Interagency Group on Indigenous Peoples and other organizations, institutions, and initiatives such as the Leaders' Pledge for Nature. Consider different conditions of disparity of IPLCs in terms of electricity, internet connection, and acquisition of technical equipment. Strengthen the training of IPLCs on the functioning of the CBD clearinghouse to facilitate access, use, and contribution of IPLCs. Have sustainable financial support through alliances with governments and financial institutions, and technical support for the development of different biodiversity-related projects. Collaboration from the Global Environmental Fund and the Green Economy Fund is essential. Effective articulation of Western and ancestral indigenous knowledge on inclusive conservation and biodiversity preservation through knowledge co-production and processes for transformation or transformative change that humanity and Mother Earth need. Joint development of short, medium, and long-term transdisciplinary and intercultural projects for a construction of diverse knowledge through the creation of educational projects at all levels, scholarships, and technical diplomas for the implementation of the CBD Convention and the Nagoya and Cartagena protocols. Increase IPLC's participation in capacity building, project design on biodiversity, financing proposal writings, resource mobilizations, spatial planning, and gender mainstreaming. Include IPLC's women and youth in the establishment of a global technical and scientific cooperation support center and the informational advisory group on technical and scientific cooperation, and their participation in the first forum for capacity building in biodiversity, exhibitions on technology and innovation, roundtables, and the development of indicators. Regulations, governance, and precautionary mechanisms for the development and implementation of biotechnology should be in place, considering its impact on human health, IPLCs, and Mother Nature. The development and transfer of indigenous technology, as well as access to indigenous and traditional knowledge, should be done with free, prior, and informed consent. And finally, promote and encourage dialogue, joint research, cooperation, and use of networks and partnerships of scientific, educational collaboration within the framework of human rights, equitable benefit sharing, mutual understanding, respect, and trust. We will send our comments to the Secretariat for draft recommendations. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, IPLCs. I will continue with the women's organizations. And I give the floor to NGO Farm. You have the floor.
Good morning, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the CBD Women Caucus. When speaking of capacity development, technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, and knowledge management, we must appreciate the unique experiences of people across the world, as well as recognize that the expertise within the field of biodiversity conservation and use takes many forms. As recognized throughout the framework of the CBD, indigenous peoples, local communities, including women specifically, are holders of ecological knowledge, central to the enabling of harmonious relationships with the environment. Across the world, these knowledges are intricately tied to unique cultures and practices, whose recognition, protection, and respect is important for the safeguarding of healthy ecosystems and the world's biodiversity. In order to achieve systemic and transformative change, as called for in the IPBES Global Assessment, it's absolutely central to bring in the expertise of these actors into decision-making processes, as well as their perspectives and experiences, while actions remain in accordance with cultural codes and uphold rules of free, prior, and informed consent. Similarly, the implementation of policies must be rigorous, inclusive, sensitive to gender concerns and other forms of societal inequalities, and uphold high standards of ethics. We are pleased to see that the guiding principles of the draft recommendations in relation to capacity development, technical and scientific cooperation, and technology transfer state that gender perspectives should be fully integrated into biodiversity capacity development efforts. We are also encouraged that the draft long-term strategic framework for capacity development to support implementation of the post-2020 GDF includes a guiding principle on gender perspectives. Here, we want to stress the importance of recognizing the unique role of women as actors and holders of unique ecological knowledges, and highlight that in many places around the world, women are currently and will continue to lead the way towards transformative change. In this regard, we want to remind participants that the empowerment of women is intricately tied to the recognition of their rights and the strengthening of their access to secure tenure. It's linked to the recognition of their unique ecological knowledges as valuable, with them being identified as important actors in decision making, as opposed to passive recipients of predetermined decisions and policies. The equitable distribution of financial resources is also important for ensuring the empowerment of women in implementation. Regarding the document on knowledge management for the post-2020 GBF, we are pleased to see women's knowledge recognized in Annex 1. However, we believe it is important to reference the need for ethics in sharing, exchange, and use of diverse knowledges, including the respect of cultural codes and appreciation for the place-based nature of many of these knowledge systems. We also want to stress the importance of actors respecting the free, prior, and informed consent of knowledge holders. We would also like to see references to the need of protecting these knowledge systems, which are currently at risk due to unsustainable practices, and the failure of states and other key actors in recognizing and respecting the rights of women, youth, and IPLCs. With regards to the evaluation of the strategic framework on capacity building to support the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol, we are pleased to see the consideration of gender within the key recommendations of the executive summary. Here, we would like to stress the importance of ensuring the inclusion of an indicator linked to gender within the post-2020 GBA. We also feel that women's unique ecological knowledge, innovations, and practices, as well as their important role in biodiversity protection, should be reflected more when speaking of relevant knowledges in actors in the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, women. I continue with my list on behalf of youth, Global Youth Biodiversity Network. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Apologies in advance for any background noise. It is paramount that a robust capacity development framework is agreed upon and implemented together with the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, as lack of capacities have been identified as one of the key challenges for parties to implement the Aichi targets. We believe that such a robust framework should focus on empowering all relevant sectors of society. We must move beyond business as usual practices for capacity development that are, frankly, alienating and patronizing to developing countries and marginalized groups. While the draft framework mentions the importance of non-state actors, Global Youth Biodiversity Network feels that the document still keep initiatives centered around government institutions and its machinery. What we are sadly missing is a more inclusive and participatory whole-of-society approach for capacity development, which includes formal and informal mechanisms as well as resources to leverage partnerships with different non-government actors. We urge parties to include substantially more references to the need for inclusion and co-creation of programs with relevant rights holders and stakeholders, including youth, women, indigenous peoples, and local communities. Here, partnering with established actors to avoid duplication of efforts plays a fundamental role. When we young people are empowered and engaged meaningfully through co-designing and co-development of programs, we can further enhance developing capacities and awareness necessary for meeting the goals of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. From the experience of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, co-creation, concrete support, and trust in the work of rights holders that are taken less into account, such as youth, women, and IPLCs, have a strong positive impact. For example, since 2017, and thanks to the support of multiple donors and parties, Global Youth Biodiversity Network has organized several capacity building workshops for youth in almost all regions of the world, where over 340 youth leaders from 120 countries received comprehensive training in how they can support the implementation of the CBD, resulting in 46 small-scale youth-led projects, which have been supported and implemented on the local and national level. Furthermore, in over 40 countries and regions, Global Youth Biodiversity Network chapters are operating as capacity development and mobilization hubs for young people committed to biodiversity. Promoting intergenerational dialogue and empowering key rights holders to develop capacities within their own communities is the only way to engage them effectively and inclusively. Therefore, we wish to see a capacity development framework, including technical and scientific cooperation, knowledge management, and communication that fosters intergenerational partnerships at all levels. Concretely, we suggest that meaningful IPLC, women and youth engagement, and intergenerational initiatives are included in national, regional, and international capacity development strategies. Directly accessible funding should be provided for such activities, and they should be included in our monitoring and evaluation frameworks, with indicators disaggregated by sex, age, and indigenous status. We will be sending concrete text suggestions in written form. We are furthermore open to dialogue with any interested actor to discuss how we can create meaningful intergenerational partnerships to enhance not only capacity development, but overall implementation, unleashing the true potential of this framework in enabling the transformative change we need. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Youth. On behalf of CBD Alliance, ETC Group, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am speaking on behalf of the CBD Alliance, a network of 400 civil society organizations active in the issues related to CBD, and on behalf of ETC Group, an international civil society organization that tracks emerging technological and scientific developments relevant to biodiversity. We collaborate with networks of experts and practitioners across civil society, including indigenous women, peoples, and peasant farmer organizations, to carry out technology horizon scanning and assessments through regional collaborative platforms. While we welcome the impetus to strengthen technical and scientific cooperation, the CBD Alliance must emphasize our deep concern that the draft decisions before us appear heavily skewed towards facilitating private sector interest and speculative market making, such as incubators and matchmaking proposals. At the same time, they fail to meet key goals identified by parties, in particular provisions for horizon scanning, technology assessment, and monitoring of the impacts of technological developments. In the document accompanying this item, elaborated by instruction of SAFSA 23, carried including consultations with parties and stakeholders, I'm referring to document SBI-3/7 add 2, it is clearly emphasized that the goals of activities in these areas should include, quote, to enable technology horizon scanning, assessment, monitoring, and judgment on the appropriate technologies, as well as to ensure prior informed consent of indigenous peoples and local communities. Another goal is to ensure that any development, scaling up, or implementation of emerging technologies, such as new biotechnologies, artificial intelligence, use of big data, and blockchains, must be, quote, based on a precautionary approach and in line with the objectives of the Convention. The document also stresses that better technology governance means that technical and scientific cooperation actions need to be first evaluated to ensure they are in line with the aims of the CBD, the rights-based approach, including FPIC, and the precautionary approach. The draft decisions, unfortunately, the draft decision before us ignores these conclusions. They lack reference to technology horizon scanning, technology assessment and monitoring, the need to put technical cooperation in the context of precaution, participation, free prior informed consent, liability and redress, and the rights-based approach. The decisions need to integrate also the recognition and promotion of indigenous knowledge and technologies, including in particular indigenous women knowledge, as well as the mandate to pursue synergies and collaboration with networks who carry out technology horizon scanning and technology assessment, as well as UN processes supporting indigenous knowledge and socially responsible innovation. The historical and present contribution of local communities, peasant and indigenous knowledge, especially women, to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, including agricultural biodiversity and the food systems that feed the majority of the world population, are fundamental and are key to affirm socially and environmentally appropriate answers to climate, biodiversity, and food crisis. We strongly request that these elements be integrated into the mandate and reflected in the composition of the Informal Advisory Group on Technical and Scientific Cooperation. We also request that the role of carrying out and supporting technology horizon scanning, assessment, and monitoring, particularly of emerging technologies, be added to the core functions of the Global Support Center and the Regional Support Centers. Finally, we invite parties to support this request. Thank you very much.
Thank you, CBD Alliance. And finally, some national and local government. In you, Region S4, you have the floor.
Thank you, dear honorable chairs and co-chairs and dear delegates. I'm taking the floor on behalf of the Advisory Committee of Subnational Governments and Biodiversity, coordinated by Regions 4 and the Government of Quebec, ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, the group of leading subnational governments towards the Aichi biodiversity targets, the European Committee of the Regions, and on behalf of the Edinburgh Process partners. Our constituency is glad to see that the draft long-term strategic framework for capacity development to support the implementation of post-2020 global biodiversity framework to be considered by the SBI-3 as inclusive and recognizes the relevance of subnational and local governments throughout the text and in particular in the section 3. Guiding principles for effective capacity development and mechanisms for implementation. Both sections reflect the core elements of the strategic framework, and the key involvement of subnational and local governments is pertinent and clear. We believe that the draft long-term strategic framework sufficiently covers the main areas that would help our constituencies catalyze and galvanize transformative action to support the implementation of the post-2020 global framework. Overall, the proposed structure is clear and comprehensive. However, we believe that it would be valuable to consider including a time frame aligned with the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, in particular the 2030 vision. Developing dedicated subnational and local capacity development strategies with specific targets, milestones, and indicators to be reached within the period of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework and aligned with national and regional plans and programs could also boost knowledge creation and can potentially increase our chances of achieving the new global biodiversity targets. We, subnational and local leaders, have partnerships and networks in place to further promote North, South, 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 and triangular cooperation. Therefore, we would like to propose to build on what we have achieved and support those learning platforms that are in place to strengthen information exchange and capacity building from global to local levels of government. The Advisory Committee on Subnational Governments to the CBD, its operational partners, the Regions 4 Biodiversity Learning Platform, and the group of leading subnational governments towards the Aichi biodiversity targets, as well as the ICLEI Cities with Nature online platform and the Edinburgh Process Partnership that includes the European Committee of the Regions, are ready to, with your support, strengthen the mechanisms for implementation. Our network platforms have been facilitating dialogue and cooperation across the different levels of government and are, more than ever, willing to continue to support national efforts for capacity development and facilitate the integration of local actors. We therefore encourage the parties to the Convention to urge their subnational and local governments to join us in this collective effort. Finally, we welcome our recognition and suggest going further by inviting the parties to the Convention to provide the financial means to materialize the implementation of the long-term strategic framework at the subnational and local level. We also ask parties to call upon your own subnational and local leaders to become part of our networks and play an active role in closing the capacity gap. Thank you.
Thank you, subnational and local government. I now open the floor for interventions by other observers. Please note your intervention should not exceed 3 minutes. And I start with AGO ACB. You have the floor.
Hello.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. The ASEAN Center for Biodiversity, or ACB, demonstrates and underscores the value of designating and establishing sub-regional and regional technical and scientific cooperation centers to scale up the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. In our sub-region, the ACB was created by the 10 member states of the Association of the Southeast Asian Nations, or the ASEAN, to facilitate regional efforts to fulfill the objectives of the CBD. It has also been designated as a regional node for the implementation of targets 11 and 12 in East and Southeast Asia regions. The ACB consistently facilitates capacity building in the ASEAN region. With the support of dialogue and development partners such as the EU, governments of India, Japan, Norway, and Germany, we have conducted various workshops, including on effective protected area management, particularly in ASEAN heritage parks, institution building, and on urban green infrastructure under the BioBridge initiative held in Singapore and in the Philippines in 2019. Moreover, the ASEAN member states are taking significant strides in technical and scientific cooperation and technology transfer, especially in the development of their national clearinghouse mechanisms, with the support of the ACB as the host of the regional CHM. Among the activities was the conduct of a training needs assessment to determine the capacities needed by protected areas and ASEAN Heritage Park staff to manage biodiversity information in support of management plan development. The results of the assessment will guide the content, design, and form of modules that will support the online training course on the data organization and management of ASEAN Heritage Parks. Apart from enhancing sub-regional and regional cooperation, these centers contribute to the framing of approaches and means of implementation that are cognizant of the resources and capacities and responsive to common needs and priorities of member countries who more often are similarly situated. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next on my list is UNU. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you well. Go ahead.
Okay, good. Just thank you for letting us take the floor. Just to let the interpreters know, I'm going to skip some of the paragraphs in the submitted document in the interest of getting in under 3 minutes. So United Nations University experience working with a decade in cooperation with UNDP, GEF, the CBD Secretariat, and many parties, among others, has shown the effectiveness of collaborative work for biodiversity conservation and human well-being on the ground. We encourage the parties to strengthen efforts towards collaborative capacity development, particularly by taking advantage of existing networks with diverse membership. The goals of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework will not be met through policy agreements between national parties and national policy making alone. A wider range of actors and stakeholders needs to be brought in, including groups that have been largely ignored to date. We have collected around 200 case studies of good practices for landscape-based activities on the website of the International Partnership for the Satayama Initiative. And we bring together lessons learned in our annual publication series, the Satayama Initiative Thematic Review. Our research work shows again and again that a landscape perspective, bringing together perspectives from all stakeholders in the landscape for biodiversity conservation and human well-being, can benefit capacity development, knowledge management, and communication efforts. And we encourage the parties to take this lesson into account, particularly in development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This finding is echoed in the outcomes of the expert thematic workshop on landscape approaches for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which we organized with partners as one of the events in the GBF preparatory process. The meeting report is included among the materials in the made available for the GBF process. Finally, we would like to stress the importance of the other effective area-based conservation measure OECM process. And we encourage the parties to consider capacity development for OECMs. We also have plans to carry out OECM capacity development efforts, and we are happy to work with and support the parties in promoting OECMs to realize living in harmony with nature. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, UNU. And next on my list is IUCN. You have the floor. IUCN, you have the floor.
Hello, do you hear me?
I can hear you now. Go ahead.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Chair. IUCN welcomes the efforts undertaken to consult broadly on the development of the long-term strategic framework for capacity development as a crucial element of the Global Biodiversity Framework that has resulted in a coherent and clear strategy. We note in particular that the strategic framework envisages that, firstly, capacity development must be targeted and designed for implementation. A framework and coordination mechanism will be needed, and that thirdly, committed partnerships will provide effective mechanisms to mobilize capacities and to share knowledge, expertise, technologies, and financial resources, and should be strengthened. The approach adopted by Panorama, with the Solutions for a Healthy Planet Partnership, is fully consistent with the meaning and scope of capacity development as set out in the draft long-term strategic framework, especially in the sense that capacity is developed through and by situated learning of engaged stakeholders. Panorama's niche has been to demonstrate in practice that capacity development begins at the implementation interface in real situations. It supports implementation through inclusive, practical, bottom-up learning, building the bridge between local implementation and global policy direction, and demonstrating the power of a strong, diverse, and flexible partnership and network. In so doing, it embraces all three levels of capacity development outlined in the strategic framework. Panorama has grown both in size and scope over several years. By February 2021, it included 823 solutions from 588 solution providers from 117 countries. It is helping to deliver the strategic objectives of the long-term strategic framework to institutionalize capacity development within and among organizations and to bridge learning across sectors. It is a made-to-measure partnership in support of the long-term strategic framework. So in that sense, Madam Chair, it is very much a partnership approach, and IUCN, through its expert networks, is well placed to contribute towards continuing to build these necessary partnerships. And I'd like to acknowledge GIZ, UNDP, UNEP, RARE, GRID, Arendal, ICROM, ICOMOS, IFOAM, Organics International, and the World Bank. We are all working together on Panorama Solutions for a Healthy Planet partnership. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, IUCN. I see no more requests for the floor. Thank you, delegates, for sharing your views. Distinguished delegates, this brings us to the end of our consideration of Agenda Item 7 on capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, knowledge management, and communication. As previously explained, there will be no conference room papers stemming from this informal session. Together with the Secretariat, I will prepare a short procedure report on the informal session, noting the parties and observers that have made interventions. Distinguished delegates, I invite you to consider Agenda Item 9, Mechanism for Reporting, Assessment and Review of Implementation. I will now give the floor to the Secretariat to introduce the documents on this agenda item. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Good morning. At COP14, parties requested the development of options to enhance review mechanisms with a view to strengthening the implementation of the Convention. More specifically, the COP requested the SBI to contribute to the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework by complementing it with elements related to means to support and review implementation. This agenda item on reporting, assessment, and review aims to respond to this mandate, including linkages with planning and monitoring. The documents under this item were prepared taking into account the outcomes of 2 meetings of the open-ended working group of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, the outcomes of 5 regional consultations for the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and the thematic consultation on transparent implementation, monitoring, reporting, and review, as well as written submissions to the process. Under this agenda item, the Secretariat has prepared the documents shown on the screen. This includes SBI-3/11, which is options to enhance planning, reporting, and review mechanisms with a view to strengthening the implementation of the Convention. SBI-311 Addendum 1, the national reporting under the Convention and its protocols. SBI-311 Addendum 2, proposed actions to enhance synergies in reporting to biodiversity-related conventions and the Rio Convention. Addendum 3, further information and draft template for the submission of national commitments or contributions to the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Note this is a REV document. The documents under SBI 311 and its addendum present the overall structure along with specific elements of a proposal for enhancing planning, monitoring, review, and reporting. This is supported by a number of information documents, which include Information Document 3, the analysis of 6 national reporting processes, and Information Document 19, I think it should be 19, not 11 on the slide, which is updated analysis of experiences under the Convention and other processes and considerations for enhancement of a multi-dimensional review mechanism. SBI will be invited to consider these documents prepared and to provide a recommendation on enhancing reporting and review mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. I will now open the floor for statements on agenda item 9, mechanism for reporting, assessment and review for implementation. And I will start with interventions by the regions. So I will now open the floor for statements from the regions. I have on my list from the African region, Egypt. If you please raise your hand. I can maybe come back to Egypt. From the Central and Eastern European region, Georgia. Could you please raise your hand? Georgia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Planning, reporting, and review are the processes that form foundation for implementation of the Convention and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. It is important to build on experience and lessons learned from the implementation of the strategic plan for 2011-2020. First of all, once again, we would like to highlight the importance of MBSEPs as the main tool for planning processes at the national level. At the same time, having in mind comprehensive and cross-cutting nature of the post-2020 GPF, it is also important to highlight that the MBSEP should represent the strategy for the whole government. The document should be developed with participation of all relevant stakeholders to ensure their ownership over the document. We believe that in order to achieve greater transparency and accountability, parties should also provide a response to the GPF quickly after its adoption in order to enable preparation of a global gap report and subsequent global stocktake. We consider the proposal to introduce national commitments to be a concept worthy of further elaboration at formal sessions of SBI. The overall structure of the proposed reporting and review mechanism suggested in the document is CBD/SBI/3/11 indeed sounds sensible. However, implementation of the suggested mechanism will also depend on easy access to relevant funding. Easy and quick procedures will be required to access GEF funding where relevant. We would also like to note that delay in adoption of the post-2020 GBF leaves us even less time for implementation than we had in case of a strategic plan for 2011-2020. National biodiversity monitoring systems should also be strengthened to support implementation and reporting process. At the same time, considering importance of having the reporting template and structure in the beginning of the implementation cycle, adoption of suggested mechanism and timeline means that it is crucial to adopt the reporting template for the 7th national reports at COP15. Use of headline indicators agreed in the beginning of the cycle is also critical for improving reporting and implementation process. Generally, we think that due to delay in adoption of the post-2020 GBF, this mechanism, especially the timelines, require further thorough discussion during the formal meetings of SBI. Further discussion is also needed on the possible ratcheting up mechanism if, based on the global stocktake, the national targets or commitments collectively fail to correspond to the ambition of the post-2020 GBF targets, as well as other components of this agenda item. In order to ensure synergies, we believe it is absolutely crucial to involve the focal points of other biodiversity-related conventions from the initial stage of planning and respective reporting. Speaking of synergies, we would also favor the indicators already used by other MEAs to be used as headline indicators where relevant. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Georgia. On behalf of the CE region, I now go back to the African statement. Since Egypt is not online, I ask if any other African party could read out the African statement as a backup.
Chair, Egypt is back online now.
Okay, Egypt is back. Egypt, if you please raise your hand. Yes, Egypt, you have the floor.
Please just give me a minute because I was in a traffic and I got lost somewhere. Give me just 1 or 2 minutes just to organize myself.
Okay, I will do like this. I continue with the. Yes, I would suggest I continue with Portugal and then come back to Egypt, if that is okay for you. I first give the floor to Portugal on behalf of the EU and its member states, and then go back to Egypt. Portugal, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The EU and its member states welcome document CBD SBI-3/11 as a very good basis for significantly strengthening the implementation, monitoring, and review mechanism under the Convention, which is crucial for effective implementation. This responds to the consistent EU and its member state calls at COP13 and COP14 for improved implementation. We consider a reinforced implementation mechanism indispensable to any outcome of COP15 in Cancun. The EU and its member states support a quick response from parties towards the post-2020 GBF in order to ensure transparency, comparability, and accountability. We consider the proposal for national commitments to be valuable for further discussion. We also welcome and acknowledge the importance of non-stated actors' action that would be reported to the CBD. A whole-of-society approach is key to reaching the ambitious yet crucial vision of living in harmony with nature. The EU and its member states support maintaining NB-SUPs as the main instrument for the implementation of the Convention at national level. Parties should update or revise their NB-SUPs in line with the post-2020 GBF as soon as possible. The EU and its member states welcome the proposal for the national reporting. We consider it useful to include a standardized section relating to headline indicators in the national reports. We support the proposal to have two main national reports in the 2020-2030 timeline. The EU and its member states support country-by-country review mechanisms to enhance the implementation for sharing of experience between parties and to strengthen capacities. The online testing of the open-handed forum on implementation showed its usefulness, but also the need for further development. The voluntary peer review should remain a useful tool to provide parties with an in-depth national analysis of their implementation efforts. Review of the implementation of the post-2020 GBF needs to become a more transparent, comparable, and reliable process than the review of implementation of the current strategic plan. This will largely depend on a science-based and reliable monitoring framework, which will include headline, component, and complementary indicators to be used to allow COP to monitor progress towards goals and targets and to review implementation of the GBF. In order to review the progress in the implementation of the post-2020 GBF, the EU and its member states agree with the proposal to prepare before each COP a gap analysis/global gap report comparing the aggregation of data indicators with the corresponding goals and targets. We further support the compilation of a report, for instance, prepared by the Secretariat of CBD or UNEP on the reported data on headline indicators prepared for each COP. Furthermore, a global stocktake should be prepared for COP17 and COP19 to assess if further actions are needed to implement the post-2020 GBF and to achieve the goals and targets and to allow for ratcheting up. This global stocktake could be composed of a technical phase of data collection and a political high-level phase. The technical phase could be based on the gap analysis/global gap report, the analysis of national report, and further relevant scientific evidence as available. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Portugal, speaking on behalf of EU and its member states. I will now go back to Egypt, speaking on behalf of the African region. Egypt, welcome back.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, Sudan and Egypt are speaking on behalf of African region because Sudan is having a problem with internet. Recalling the decision 14/27, paragraph 1, the Conference of Parties decided to commence with synchronized reporting cycles of the Convention, Cartagena Protocol, and Nagoya Protocol in 2023. In the decision 14 as well /34, the Conference of Parties requested subsidiary body on implementation at the third meeting to contribute to the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and to complement it with elements related to means to support the review implementation. Egypt and Sudan, on behalf of Africa, welcome the documents on the mechanisms for reporting, assessment, and review of implementation, and note by the Executive Secretary on the national reporting under the Convention. Madam Chair, national reports should continue to be the main instrument for monitoring and reviewing the implementation of the Convention and the post-2020 GBF at the national and global levels. However, more effective, simplified, and transparent national reporting templates is required. Also, the template should focus on information which is essential to assessing progress towards the implementation of the Convention and the post-2020 GBF. We welcome the development process of indicators under the GBF. Smart indicators and the targets under the GBF are essential for effective monitoring and the assessment, as well and against which each party can report to ensure the effectiveness of progress in implementation. Madam Chair, provision of developing countries, including the least developed countries and small island developing states, with adequate and simple and timely financial support, capacity building, and technical and scientific cooperation are essential to support the preparation of national reports. With regard to the periodicity of national reports, Africa supports to maintain the current process of submitting 2 national reports within a 10-year period. Review mechanism should be promotional and cooperative. It should promote partnerships with important stakeholders. Considering the issue of national commitment, ambitious of parties must remain proportional to the situation and needs of the countries and region, as well as appropriate to the national context and build upon voluntary commitment. Therefore, considering the proposed recommendation to SBI-3, the African region is of the view that simplified and flexible reporting templates is facilitated by the 7th national reports. Regarding the recommendation 18, we request the Executive Secretary to update the template for national commitments and develop a simplified and flexible reporting template for the 7 national reports provided in the Annex X to reflect the post-2020 GBF as adopted, and to make them available to parties through the clearinghouse mechanism of the Convention by 31st of January 2022. Madam Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you, Egypt, speaking on behalf of the African region. So I see no more requests from the regions, so I will continue and open the floor for interventions by parties. If you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will be entered in the queue list. When I give you the floor, your microphone will be activated, the status bar will turn red on your computer, and you may start to speak immediately. So I will continue, start with my list of parties. I will start to give the floor to Cambodia, followed by Japan and Brazil. Cambodia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Cambodia take note the useful information in document CBD/SBI/3/11 at 2, providing tangible option for enhancing synergy of national reporting among biodiversity-related convention and Rio Convention, which can be used as a practical basic for the proposed alternative reporting system for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Cambodia applaud the certain option and tool as recommended in paragraph 3E and F of decision 14/27, including but not limited the setting up common indicator, development of reporting model on share issue, enhancing interoperability of information management and reporting system, tool and mean for increasing synergy international reporting among all the biodiversity-related conventions. We therefore propose that this critical mechanism need to take into consideration in the process of post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. In terms of specific reporting, assessment, and review of ongoing progress, Cambodia experienced the establishment of a multi-sectoral steering committee, serving not only as coordination and cooperation entity to streamline national biodiversity governance to ensure the convention and its protocol are well implemented, but also as a mechanism to report, assess, and monitor the achievement made by the relevant stakeholder. Its results are used to report Cambodia's commitment as the party of the CBD. Madam Chair, with the above mentioned, Cambodia expressed its appreciation of the potential value of a widely recognized and owned post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework by all relevant institutions and organizations. A shared implementation and reporting system is of highest benefit not only to strengthen cost effectiveness, consistency, and building a common understanding of biodiversity value, but also to avoid workload and duplicate reporting commitment. In this regard, Cambodia would like to suggest for this meeting to take into account an option to develop a common joint reporting format whereby a single report, where feasible and appropriate, can be made relevant to all biodiversity-related conventions, and it can be used by all the parties of this convention at all levels. Finally, Madam Chair, Cambodia supports suggested recommendation 9, 12, 18J and L, and request for 2 additional recommendations in where as appropriate. 1. Encouraging parties to establish and strengthen National Biodiversity Steering Committee or similar body which involvement from responsible mere institution and Rio Convention focal point to the process of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And 2. Building capacity of mere institution and its focal point and provide adequate resources, technical and financial, for developing 7 national reports to the convention. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Cambodia. I now give the floor to Japan, followed by Brazil and China. Japan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Thank you, and Madam Chair and dear colleagues. Japan would like to mention 5 points on the monitoring and the reviewing process. First of all, regarding the national commitment, we agree that it would serve as a quick response to the post-2020 GBF. However, we should also put emphasis on the NB subs since it is clearly stipulated in the convention. Thus, Japan proposed to define national commitment as a component of NB subs by a COP decision. Second, with regard to the global gap report, we are of the view that the gap report can be included in the GBO or SBI document. We believe it's simpler and more efficient than developing it as a completely new document. Third, with regard to the global stocktake, we are basically supportive of the idea since it would be a good opportunity to raise awareness and ambition, especially for political communication, and it would also be effective to assess whether additional efforts are needed or not at the middle phase of the GBF. However, there is still room for improvement in the efficiency. At first, we have to make sure that the national reporting is carried out in line with the common format and indicators, while taking into account national circumstances. Then the scope of the global stocktake should focus on indicators that requires global efforts and ratcheting up. In addition, we should clearly mention a symbol of representing a progression used in the Paris Agreement, which declares that the ambition for the commitment must go forward, not backward, when we update our NBSAPs or submit new national commitment. Fourth, from a practical viewpoint, we support country by country peer reviews as a voluntary process, at least for the time being. Natural environment and social conditions vary from country to country. Thus, we think that obligatory peer review, where a specific party is reviewed by another party, may not be appropriate unless we take into account these differences in the process. Last, as for the proposal of the biodiversity monitoring information system, we don't have enough information on the details and thus we cannot judge the necessity at this moment. Therefore, we request the Secretary to provide further explanation, including the cost implication. We will submit a comment for more detailed information. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Japan. I now give the floor to Brazil, followed by China and New Zealand. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It is a pleasure to see you again. I will present some preliminary comments on behalf of Brazil on this agenda item, and our official position will be presented at a formal face-to-face meeting. Brazil believes that the implementation of the post-2020 GBF must be based on improving the efficiency of existing reporting mechanisms. The preparation of the sixth national report to the Convention has demonstrated the significant reporting burden placed especially on developing countries. Bearing that in mind, Brazil would like to express its deep concern on the proposals presented in Section 4 of document SBI-3/11 regarding the multidimensional approach. Brazil understands that requesting parties to submit national commitments as national contributions towards the post-2020 GBF and update them in light of the so-called GAP report represents a radical departure from the mandate of the Convention. We must recall that national biodiversity strategies and action plans remain the major framework to support the implementation of the Convention at the national level. National targets or commitments should be developed according to national circumstances and take into account the common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. Furthermore, we'd like to emphasize that we have been surprised by this proposal. We must remind ourselves that the negotiation of the post-2020 GBF is a party-driven process. COP Decision 14/29 requested the Secretariat to develop options to enhance review mechanisms. From Brazil's perspective, the comprehensive multidimensional approach falls outside the scope of this request. Therefore, we are not convinced of the added value of other modalities proposed therein, such as country-by-country reviews and the Global Biodiversity Monitoring System. Both mechanisms would place additional burden on scarce human and technical resources in developing countries, amongst other possible negative impacts. Finally, regarding national reporting, we must take into account that the monitoring framework for the post-2020 GBF will pose additional challenges given the expected number of headline indicators. Hence, we must simplify the reporting process, improving online submissions that can be easily updated. In addition, parties must be given the possibility of employing additional indicators to reflect local realities. If we are to achieve an in-depth review of implementation, national reports must remain focused on the objectives of the Convention and the targets to be adopted in the post-2020 GBF. We must not broaden the scope of reports to address issues that do not relate to the mandate of the Convention, as suggested in Annex 1. Brazil looks forward to continuing discussions on this topic during the formal face-to-face meeting. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Brazil. I now give the floor to China, followed by New Zealand and Norway. China, you have the floor.
谢谢主席。中国感谢秘书处为本议。
Thank you. China appreciates the efforts made by the Secretariat for the detailed documents. We thank the Secretariat and SBI Chair for conducting the open-ended forum for testing of this country-by-country review process as mandated by COPE decisions. We also wish to thank all parties for their sharing of views. It is noted that significant progress has been made in elaboration of concepts to be used in the mechanisms and the preparation of draft text. We believe that though we still have some divergent views, we are getting closer to each other's understandings and consensus. China would like to suggest a Secretariat to further update the documents on the basis of convention provisions and the ideas shared by parties. China is of the view that NAPSAP continue to be the main mechanism in the post-2020 GBF, and the national commitments should be part of NAPSAP. The provisions for monitoring and reporting should consider the national
For interpreters. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. 监测和报告要考虑缔约方的国情和能力。
Provisions for monitoring and reporting should consider the national circumstances and capacity of countries, and therefore we suggest to include capacity building support to enhance monitoring and reporting upon request. In principle, China supports the test on online open-ended forum for review and suggests stock-take experiences, especially on how to identify financial and capacity-related challenges. China also suggests to invite the GEF to provide developing countries financial support to conduct report, assessment, and review. China highly recognizes the contributions by non-state actors and supports to enhance their publicity. However, due to the different legal nature, we suggest the contributions by non-state actors be submitted separately from NAPSAP and the progress be reported separately. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, China. And before we continue, I would like to remind all speakers to try to speak slowly and clearly to help our interpreters. And I also have got the information that if you have a cell phone, mobile phone, please mute it when you speak, because sometimes it also interrupts and make it more difficult for interpreters. So thank you so much. We please help each other to make this work well. So thank you very much for your understanding. I will now continue with my list, and on my list is New Zealand, followed by Norway and Argentina. New Zealand, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. New Zealand supports the adoption of enhanced planning, reporting and review processes under the post-2020 framework and the overall direction of the draft decision under this item. Many of the proposals could have significant implications for national and global monitoring systems, which we will need to explore further domestically. At this stage, however, we have the following initial comments on the proposed draft mechanism. Firstly, we support the introduction of a more cyclical reporting, review, and ambition model under the CBD. Regular international visibility of collective progress will be a key driver of increased ambition and action, and it makes sense to use regular assessments of collective progress to periodically review and reaffirm commitments at both national and global levels. Secondly, we support the introduction of regular global stocktakes, including as part of a more cyclical approach. However, we believe further discussion is needed on what sources of information would be the most useful inputs to these global stocktakes. We suggest that the IFBES global assessments and global headline indicators would also be important and possibly more useful than parties' national reports, which, as we know, are hard to aggregate. Thirdly, we support further discussions on national reporting against a limited core set of headline global indicators, making use where possible of existing data collected for management purposes at the national level, or information that can be efficiently collected at a global scale. We would be interested to explore whether there would be value in encouraging parties to incorporate these and other global target indicators into parties' NBSAP monitoring and reporting systems as a part of future guidance on updating NBSAPs. This could be a possible means to strengthen alignment between national contributions and the global goals without necessarily requiring full-scale revisions to NBSAPs, which are otherwise fit for purpose. Finally, on national commitments, we are open to the idea of encouraging parties to make national commitments against the global targets, if this can be done in a way which still recognizes different countries' very different opportunities and therefore priorities in how they can best contribute to the global goals. However, it will be important not to undermine the central planning function of NBSAPs as entrenched in the Convention. New Zealand will submit these comments to the Secretariat in written form. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. I will now give the floor to Norway, followed by Argentina, United Kingdom. Norway, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We welcome the discussion on how to strengthen mechanisms for planning, reporting and review at SBI-3. However, it is the open-ended working group under the guidance of co-chairs that needs to lead and conclude the work on this item. We therefore stress the need for further deliberations at the open-ended working group with technical input from the Secretariat. A strengthened implementation structure needs to build on existing instruments as outlined in the mandate from COP14. We are therefore disappointed to see the advice from the Secretariat is to develop new separate instruments such as the national commitments, rather than seeking to improve NBSAPs, our main tool for national implementation. We also feel that this approach lacks support from parties. Norway agrees that it's important that parties make a stronger link between their efforts at home and the global framework. All parties should communicate how they're contributing to each of the targets of the GBF in their updated or revised NBSAP. NBSAPs should continue to allow for flexibility post-2020, given different national circumstances, but we should also use this opportunity to strengthen NBSAPs by introducing some common elements that would be consistent across all NBSAPs in their updated or revised versions. Key elements would be specification of national contributions to all targets of the GBF, agreement to improve and strengthen action in each successive NBSAP, and common timelines for communicating NBSAPs. The NBSAPs should be updated or revised in line with the GBF, preferably by COP16. National reports should remain the starting point for the reporting procedures. Reports should be submitted in regular intervals, allowing timely and updated information on all parties' performance. A full national report should be submitted every 4 years, with shorter biannual update reports based on headline indicators only. We're not convinced of the added value of the party-led review process in its current form. However, we do see merit in introducing reviews carried out by independent objective technical experts against agreed standards. We believe the suggestion on a global analytical review is too comprehensive and complex. We support the introduction of a global biodiversity stocktake at regular intervals, overseen by SBI to measure collective progress towards the GBF, including on capacity building and resource mobilization. The process should be informed by the most recent scientific input from IPBES and a compilation of national reports. The purpose is to inform the next round of coordinated NBSAP provision by parties. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Norway. I will now give the floor to Argentina, followed by UK and Canada. Argentina, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is made in an informal manner prior to the SBI-3 formal meeting. On this agenda item, I would like to make the following comments. the reporting, assessment and review mechanism for the implementation of the CBD should be restricted to the provisions in Article 26 of the Convention. Here I cite, to present to the COP reports on measures which it has taken for the implementation of the provisions of this Convention and their effectiveness in meeting the objectives of this Convention. This mechanism should review the means of implementation available under the Convention, namely, as mentioned in Article 6A, and here I cite once again, each contracting party shall, in accordance with its particular conditions and capabilities, develop national strategies, plans, or programs for the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. End of citation. Argentina calls attention to the proposals in the documents prepared under this agenda item, which explore possibilities that we believe could go beyond the provisions of the Convention and what has been requested by the parties. We are concerned with various proposals in the 18 pages of the recommended decision and its annexes, which could imply a heavy burden when they have to be implemented by government and other actors, including, as they do, actions that it would be difficult to see how they actually dovetail with Article 26 and 6A of the CBD. For example, and this has already been mentioned by other parties, the proposal to submit national commitments and contributions within the Global Biodiversity Framework, additional to the MBSAPs. Here, it must be recalled that in Decision 1434, it was established that the process for developing the Global Biodiversity Framework, including its implementation review mechanism, should be a party-led process. Additionally, in Decision 1429, it's required that there should be the development of options to enhance the current review mechanisms. So we should concentrate on improving the existing reporting mechanisms. Finally, it should be pointed out that we're currently negotiating a framework to implement an existing international convention without having a mandate to create new obligations for the parties. Thus, Argentina considers that it's necessary to redraft the document and its draft recommendations. And we'd like to reiterate that we're committed to strengthening these reporting and review mechanisms, which should be in line with the text of the Convention. And we, of course, wish to actively participate in this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Argentina. I will now give the floor to United Kingdom, followed by Canada and Colombia. United Kingdom, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The UK believes that strengthened reporting and review mechanisms are vital for the successful implementation of the GBF. We appreciate the Secretariat's efforts to develop proposals building on the lessons learned and the very constructive consultations in Rome last year. These are a good starting point. However, more discussions are needed to develop a common understanding of the approach and terminology. Sufficient time must be set aside for these discussions at SBI-3 and at the third meeting of the open-ended working group. We need an integrated planning, reporting and review cycle with the following key elements. First, NBSAPs and national reports. We have already provided comments on these under Agenda Item 3. Second, an early review of ambition to highlight areas where more efforts may be needed to meet the global goals and targets, and a ratcheting up mechanism to increase ambition and implementation where there are gaps. For this, we need a clear presentation of each party's contributions or commitments to meeting the global goals and targets in a consistent manner. Third, effective monitoring through a limited number of shared headline indicators and supported by component, complementary, and any other relevant indicators used flexibly at the national level. Fourth, midterm and final review of implementation through a global stocktake process, considering information from national reports, indicators, and scientific analysis. When strengthening these mechanisms, we should continue to consider different national circumstances and maintain flexibility. But there is also a strong need for increased transparency and a more standard approach to gathering and presenting information. We also need to improve synergies with other conventions and processes to avoid duplication of efforts. There is clearly a lot of work to be done before we can agree the whole package at COP15. To help us make progress, we request the Secretariat to revise the papers before the formal SBI-3 meeting to correct the inconsistent use of terminology, For example, various terms are used for what we understand to be the same mechanism, such as the Global Gap Report, Gap Analysis, and Global Stocktakes of National Contributions. Following SBI-3, the documents will need to be further updated to reflect the discussions for consideration at OEWG3. We look forward to continuing discussions on strengthening reporting and review mechanisms and to advance our common understanding. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, United Kingdom. I will now give the floor to Canada, followed by Colombia and Switzerland. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and good day, everyone. Canada believes that SBI-3 Agenda Item 9 provides a good starting point for discussions, but that further guidance is needed from parties to shape this agenda item moving forward. Procedurally speaking, Canada believes that recommendations under this agenda item should go for further negotiation at OEWG3 prior to making their way to COP15, so that parties can negotiate as a package the relevant decisions that will comprise the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. On the planning mechanism, Canada will be proposing changes throughout the decision text that place NBSAPs, not national commitments, at the center of the multidimensional approach for planning, reporting, and review. Canada does also support voluntary high-level national commitments within 1 year to help drive ambition and early action. But we recognize that given this tight timeline, that they will lack the specificity and coverage required to outline parties' fulsome contributions to the Global Biodiversity Framework. Canada believes that improvements can be made to NBSAPs, including the provision of additional guidance to ensure that NBSAPs are comparable, that they reflect all goals and targets, and that they are updated within 2 years. Canada is also open to NBSAPs, including a cost assessment component. Related to reporting, Canada supports a reporting system that minimizes the burden on parties and is aligned with the processes of relevant multilateral conventions. Canada is cautious of proposals that call for parties to undertake significant work related to the establishment of new coordinating bodies and shared information systems for biodiversity-related conventions. Canada generally supports the proposed elements of the template for the 7th National Report, but will be suggesting some tweaks in language in our written submission. On the review mechanism, Canada supports in principle the various mechanisms proposed and looks forward to reviewing the specific modalities for each mechanism in detail when they become available. For now, Canada wishes to highlight the need for each mechanism to provide clear value added over existing review mechanisms, whilst also taking into account the limited availability of resources so as to not overburden parties. Canada is cautious of the call for the creation of cumbersome new mechanisms and the potential duplication of efforts of existing global assessment processes. Throughout the recommendation text, Canada will also be proposing the inclusion of strategic references that highlight the important contributions that subnational and local governments, women, as well as Indigenous peoples and local communities make to the multidimensional approach to planning, reporting, and review. Canada will be submitting our detailed textual changes in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. I will now give the floor to Colombia, and after Colombia, we'll take a 15-minute break. But first, I would like to give the floor to Colombia. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We consider that the proposals and options to improve the planning, reporting, and review mechanism presented in document SBI-3/11 are a good basis for discussion. We have specific comments on the following aspects. NBSAPs and national reports should remain as the main national planning and reporting instruments for the implementation and revision of the Convention in accordance with CBD Articles 6 and 26. NBSAPs and national reports should be standardized through headline indicators to allow comparability and to facilitate the assessment of collective progress towards fulfilling the GBF. Additional guidance will be required for parties to quickly update their NBSAPs accordingly. NBSAPs should have a progressive nature where ambition cannot be lowered in future update periods and should reflect the highest possible ambition for each party. Besides, the required resources to support the continuous planning and reporting cycles must be available and predictable for developing countries. There is no clarity about what is meant by national commitments. The proposal is giving more weight to these commitments than to the NBSAPs. Commitments are those included under the NBSAPs. Therefore, other parallel instruments should not be the main element under the review mechanism. National reports, the GAP report, and the global stocktake should be based on NBSAPs, and these must be directly a part of the implementation review process. Regarding party-led peer review processes, there is a lack of clarity on the added value of the open-ended forum undertaken in September 2020. Although this mechanism can be useful to strengthen implementation and dialogue among peers, we don't agree with including at this stage this modality as part of the enhanced multidimensional approach. On the global analytical review, we agree with the three elements proposed in the document, and we consider necessary to include under this review an assessment of progress and gaps of all parties and relevant stakeholders on the goals and targets related to means of implementation and resource mobilization. It will be important to clarify which will be the role in the global stocktake of the GBO, IGBES, FAO, and other organizations' reports in order to ensure that efforts won't be duplicated. Lastly, we agree with the implications identified by the Secretariat, but implications are not only given in terms of monitoring and review systems. Implementation itself will carry incremental costs. The draft recommendation should include language for ensuring the technical, financial, and technological resources required by developing countries as a necessary condition to accomplish the GBF. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Colombia. Colleagues, we'll now take a 50-minute break, and after the break, I will start with Switzerland, followed by Mexico and Costa Rica. So please retain your connection during the break. There's no need to log off. Secretariat, when will we convene?
We'll reconvene at 8:45 Montreal time. So if everyone can come back at 8:45, so 8:45, 8:46, we'll reconvene. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretariat, at 8:45. Have a nice break. Dear colleagues, I hope you have enjoyed your break. I would like to continue our interventions. So before the break, we had a list. So we will now continue with Switzerland, followed by Mexico and Costa Rica. Switzerland, you have the floor.
Madam Chair, dear colleagues, Switzerland supports a robust mechanism for reporting, assessment and review, which should create transparency with regard to implementation, success and challenges, create assurance that all parties act in appropriate manner, allow detecting problems and challenges with regard to implementation, allow learning from each other, and help and stimulate improvement of action. Such a mechanism should include the following elements. A. Individual country-specific components. Parties have to review the NBSAPs and align them with the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework GBF. To facilitate this update of NBSAPs, common guidance should be adopted, including that NBSAPs should address all agreed headline indicators. Parties should report regularly in a transparent manner about their implementation on the post-2020 GBF and about progress towards each of the agreed headline indicators. To facilitate reporting, the COP should adopt common guidance and a template. A synergetic modular approach for online reporting under all biodiversity-related conventions should be adopted as the DART tool developed by UNEP, allowing to streamline and simplify reporting, to reduce reporting burden for parties, to diminish overlaps and duplications, and at the same time to ensure a comprehensive overview of progress towards the GBF. Parties should benefit from a review of their reports by peers and/or experts, and from in-depth exchange with the expert peer review team. National reports and key conclusions of the review should be presented and discussed in a multilateral setting to allow for sharing of experience and learning from each other, whereby not only parties but also any other stakeholders should be allowed to contribute to this exchange of experience and lessons learned. On a global level, we have global components, and as such, we would like to see a regular global stocktake that would analyze from aggregated overall perspective progress towards achievement of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Input to this stocktake should come from scientific assessments conducted by IPES, providing an aggregate perspective, and from national reports, providing a country-specific perspective. This stocktake would allow COP to take necessary decisions to address challenges with regard to progress towards achievement of the goals and targets set out in the GBF. Switzerland does not support the concept of national commitments as an additional layer in the post-2020 GBF, as they would create additional burden without any added value, but would weaken the central tool of the NBSAPs, and as progress should be assessed against the GBF and not against nationally formulated commitments. The Secretariat should forward the results of the discussions of SBI-3 to the co-chairs of Open-Ended Working Group to allow them to prepare the input for the third meeting of the Open-Ended Working Group. The Open-Ended Working Group should further discuss this input and concrete proposal for adoption by the COP. Thank you.
Thank you, Switzerland. I will now give the floor to Mexico, followed by Costa Rica and Ethiopia. Mexico, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Madam Chair, Mexico takes note of the documents prepared by the Secretariat and wishes to express the following. Firstly, we agree that the parties should identify and announce national commitments that contribute to the new post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework as soon as it is adopted. Secondly, we support the proposal that other relevant actors, such as subnational authorities, the private sector, IPLCs, representatives of civil society, youth, and women, should be called upon to establish and announce these voluntary commitments. We also agree that the NBSAPs and national reports should be the main means for implementing the convention and also reporting on the progress before the CBD, respectively. We underscore that the new post-2020 framework's priority should be to achieve effective and inclusive implementation. And in this regard, we express our concern that in the interest of improving transparency, parties may spend more time on reporting rather than on the coordination and implementation of the concrete actions under their NBSAPs. We suggest that the formats for reports and commitments should be simple, clear, and standardized so that they can be comparable at a global scale, thus making strategic use of the limited financial and human resources available. Considering that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, in the best case scenario, we will have 8 effective years to implement the post-2020 framework, produce data and review and update national reports, and so this period needs to be adjusted for all this reporting. Therefore, we suggest that the 7th national report should be submitted in 2024 or 2025. On the other hand, we think that holding a peer review process is still encountering significant challenges, and we're not observing a direct benefit in the expeditious implementation process for updated national strategies. And once again, this also comes with an extra workload. Therefore, we are of the opinion that this process should remain voluntary. Coming now to the establishment of a global review mechanism, we believe that this could be a useful tool as long as it doesn't complicate, compromise, or slow down the implementation tasks of the national teams. Finally, we wish to emphasize that the proposal of a multi-dimensional review of the convention has significant budgetary implications which will have to be analysed, and giving priority to effective implementation of action in the national sphere. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mexico. I will now give the floor to Costa Rica, followed by Ethiopia and Uganda. Costa Rica, you have the floor.
Do you hear me, Chair?
Yes, I hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Costa Rica desea resaltar.
Rica wishes to highlight the multidimensional, interdisciplinary, and participatory approach that needs to be included in any planning and report mechanism for a convention as complicated as the CBD. Preliminarily, Costa Rica agrees with including a specific report for monitoring the post-2020 framework, in spite of the fact that this will lead to additional work at a national level. We recognise that we cannot expect the updating of our NBSAP before we actually draw up our overall strategy. But we'd like to recall that the preparation of a specific report on the post-2020 framework will need support and capacity building and logistical and financial support. Moreover, my country believes that it's extremely important to ensure that the planning and reporting mechanism improves the linkages with other processes, including the Sustainable Development Goals under the 2030 Agenda, so that we can minimize the reporting burden and maximize synergy and coordination with other processes. We agree with adding the commitments from non-state actors. However, we consider that we need to discuss more whether these commitments from non-state actors will be on the same footing as the national commitments? Are they aligned with our strategic targets? At a national level, do we need to try and see how we can manage these commitments, and who will register the progress made towards these commitments undertaken by non-state actors? So we need to have a mechanism for linking up the state and the non-state actors when it comes to monitoring these specific targets and goals. Thus, it's very complicated for governments to guarantee the monitoring and the fulfillment of these types of commitments pursued by non-state actors. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Costa Rica. I will now give the floor to Ethiopia, followed by Uganda. Ethiopia, you have the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, loud and clear.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Ethiopia supports the statement made by Egypt on behalf of African region. And Ethiopia believes that NFSAPs are the main instrument for implementing the convention at the national level, and national reports are the main tools for monitoring and reviewing the implementation of the convention and the post-2020 GBF. Better mechanism for planning, reporting, and reviewing on the implementation and supporting the implementation of the convention on the post-2020 GBF is required to improve accountability and transparency at the national level. It is obvious that it needs an adequate investment or financing at the national level to consolidate and synergize national biodiversity data collection, data sharing and integration, and scientific assessment and research. Therefore, Ethiopia supports the development of modalities, mechanisms, tools, and operations of the multidimensional reporting and reviewing approach is necessary, including the development of guideline and template for preparation and submission of national commitments in support of the post-2020 GBF, as well as the 7th national reports with online reporting facilities for consideration at the COP15. The development of national action plans for the implementation of the post-2020 GBF, including global assessment of the progress towards the goals and targets of the post-2020 GBF for consideration at the meeting of Conference of Parties 15. Third, develop the scope, timeline, method, and institutional arrangement, resource mobilization, and expected outcomes of the global stocktake of national commitments and contributions to the post-2020 GBF, and for consideration at the third meeting of open-ended working group. Finally, Ethiopia believes that the implementation of national commitments and contributions to the goals and targets of post-2020 GBF, revising and updating the NFSAPs or other relevant national planning instruments, the development of national monitoring system requires appropriate resource mobilization by GEF and other funding agencies to make the necessary preparation to ensure that support
Ethiopia, sorry to interrupt, but maybe could you slow down a little? Could you please slow down? Thank you.
All right, thank you. And finally, Ethiopia believes that the implementation of national commitments and contributions to the goals and targets of the post-2020 GBF, revising and updating the NFSAPs or other relevant planning instruments, the development of national monitoring system requires appropriate resource mobilization by GEF and other funding agencies to make the necessary preparation to ensure that support is available in a timely and efficient manner, in particular for developing countries and small island states. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ethiopia. And finally on my list for parties is Uganda. Uganda, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Madam and the team, and good afternoon, good evening, everywhere, wherever we are. Madam Chair, Uganda aligns with the Egypt on behalf of African group and emphasizes that the NBSAP should remain the main tool and the primary basis for planning, reporting, assessment, and reviewing of performance during the post-2020 GBF. And that development of indicators for NBSAP targets should consider their use and the feasibility at multiple scales, take into account accountability, transparency, stakeholders' participation, financing, capacity, and the national circumstances and priorities. Uganda supports mechanisms that will promote global analysis and assessment, open-ended forums, and the voluntary peer review mechanisms. And Madam Chair, it's noted that Uganda participated in the peer review mechanism, the voluntary peer review mechanism, as a reviewer and a reviewee. And therefore, Uganda has already benefited. And we know that we have built our internal capacity. And we are emphasizing that here, the voluntary peer review mechanism should be promoted as one of the mechanisms because it is good for accountability, participation, data generation, analysis, and effective assessment of reporting and review. Madam Chair, based on our experiences in the national, in the sixth report, in the VPR methodology and the process, and the various competitions and the work of the Secretariat, and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, we recommend as follows. One, we are emphasizing on enhanced planning, reporting, and review mechanism under the convention, which should be technically sound, objective, transparent, accountable, collaborative, cost-effective, participatory, and mandatory for participants, not punitive. Two, we are emphasizing on smart targets at all scales and levels, with the national circumstances, priorities, and within national circumstances, priorities, and capacity. Three, provision of smooth transition of post-2020 GBF based on the current best practices, lessons, and experience within the countries, regional blocks, and the UN system. Therefore, they need to promote mutual peer learning and exchange of experience at different levels. Number four, periodic review of the planning, assessment, reporting, and the tools for continuous performance improvement. Therefore, they call for standardized reporting formats at periodical level. Number 5 OE, improvement on and upscaling of the VPR methodology and the process. Take into account that it must be feasible with increased technical.
Uganda, sorry to interrupt. Could you please speak into the mic? Thank you.
Thank you. Number 5 is that Uganda is calling for improvement on and upscaling of the voluntary peer review mechanism and the methodology based on its feasibility, increased technical and financial support, mandatory but with incentives and not punitive. Last but not least, Uganda emphasizes on adequate financing for the efficient and effective mechanisms for reporting and review. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Uganda. I see no more requests from parties for the floor. We now move to interventions from non-parties. I see no requests for the floor. I would now like to open the floor for interventions by representatives of major stakeholder groups. Each statement should not exceed 5 minutes. And I will start on behalf of the IPLC's Forest People's Program, NGO FPP. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson and honored colleagues. I'm speaking on behalf of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. We wish to underline the fundamental importance of indigenous peoples and local communities' full and effective participation. Are you hearing me, Madam Chair?
Yes, I hear you. Go ahead.
Full and effective participation in the processes of planning, reporting, assessment, and review to enhance the implementation of the goals of the Convention. Such participation requires an enabling framework, including accessible mechanisms, supportive partnerships with governments and others, as well as targeted financial resources for IPLCs to effectively contribute to this work at local, national, regional, and global levels. GBO5 and LBO2 report that despite some progress during the decade, Aichi Biodiversity Target 18 has not been met, with only 10% of parties engaging IPLCs in the planning of NBSAPs, and that the indicators and traditional knowledge have not been used. There is also a gap in the engagement and inclusion of IPLCs in the Cartagena and Nagoya protocols and in the monitoring and reporting mechanisms thereof. IIFB's message is that ongoing disregard for the full and vital contributions of IPLCs to biodiversity conservation and sustainable use constitutes a major missed opportunity for the UN decade that has also impacted the fulfillment of complementary commitments in other global processes like climate and the SDGs. This consistent neglect has affected underachievement of all 20 Aichi biodiversity targets, and a fundamental lesson to be learned about securing the future of nature and cultures is putting the rights and cultures of IPLCs at the heart of the 2050 biodiversity strategy. We commend the Secretariat for the comprehensive documents prepared under this agenda item, but we would like to highlight some needed changes based on lessons learned about the implementation of Aichi Biodiversity Target 18 under Strategic Plan 2011-2020. IIFB makes the following proposals, and accompanying textual proposals will be in our submitted statement. There is a need to underline more strongly the importance of whole society alongside whole government approaches in planning, reporting, experience sharing, and affirming that these are multidimensional, inclusive, and participatory. This is not a simple add-on to government leadership. It is a core principle in transparent, accountable, and effective governance. IIFB strongly supports the identified elements of the proposed reporting and review mechanism. Commitments made by non-state actors, particularly the collective actions of IPLCs, as well as their knowledge systems, must be appropriately reflected and valued as important contributions towards national strategies, national ambitions, and national implementation. In this regard, community-based monitoring and information systems, citizen science, and biocultural indicators are important components of all biodiversity monitoring systems. IIFB is committed to the continued publication of local biodiversity outlooks as a complementary report to Global Biodiversity Outlook. This report can serve as a mechanism for community-based monitoring, community-based assessments of biodiversity outcomes, as well as a hub for data generation and application of CBD adapted indicators. IFB welcomes the analysis and proposals contained in the note by the Executive Secretary and requests the co-chairs on the post-2020 GBF to take them into account when preparing documentation related to the post-2020 GBF. These are the main recommendations arising from our collective discussions, and we're submitting our textual proposals in our uploaded statement. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. On behalf of women's organization, NGO Farm, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the CBD Women Caucus. The preambular text of the Convention recognizes the vital role that women play and affirms the need for the full participation of women at all levels of policymaking and implementation for biological diversity conservation. Recognize the role that women can contribute to the implementation of biological diversity conservation still needs to be duly strengthened and integrated, including in the reporting, review, and monitoring to ensure the full implementation of the post-2020 GBF and achieve the goals and targets set out therein. We have been saying this for too long, but still are facing the challenge of seeing it duly reflected in the post-2020. The review of the Gender Plan of Action prepared by the Secretariat should be used to guide the mechanism for enhanced reporting, review, and planning, including elements in the templates being proposed. The working document indicates indicator-based monitoring is to be used for the consistency review of implementation. There is the need to ensure for relevant gender-responsive indicator to be reflected throughout the GBF to access the full framework. This will also assist with identifying and addressing gaps in both commitments and implementation. In the review of the implementation of the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011-2020 on Target 14, the only one that did explicitly acknowledge women's needs, said the GBO5 notes that a number of parties lack knowledge of or data on how the needs of women may be taken into account in ecosystem management. This consideration should be taken on board to ensure that this gap in knowledge is taken seriously and addressed. We acknowledge the growing number of parties that are making progress, but it is clearly not enough. We acknowledge the difficulty in addressing the gender biodiversity data gap and recommend considering national capacity development on gender-sensitive data collection and indicators used that the Secretary CBD and other agencies could support and provide to parties, including in collaboration with women's organizations and gender experts. In the whole of the documentation presented for this item, including the info documents, we still fail to see adequate actions being proposed, besides the general reference that women and others should be involved in the planning, reporting, implementation, and review at all scales. More concrete efforts clearly have to be proposed and supported in order for us to be enable the necessary change. This includes a call for the institutionalization of gender concerns across international, national, and local processes and mechanisms. Such efforts also need support through capacity development, access to financial resources to realize inclusive reporting, assessment, and reviewing processes, and the inclusion of indicators to measure progress. This is especially important to consider with regards of the post-2020 GBF. What is missing is how. We urge parties to ensure that they have a gender-responsive element into their national commitments, including recognition and including non-state actors, IPLC, and relevant stakeholders in parties' national commitments. But once again, in order to align the reporting, review, and implementation, we need to ensure that the post-2020 is also thoroughly gender-responsive. The post-2020 Gender Plan of Action will be a key action agenda that should be considered in the all aspects of planning, reporting, implementation, and review at all scales. We would like to see this reflected in the suggested elements of a recommendation to the SBI and to the Conference of the Parties. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. On behalf of youth, Global Youth Biodiversity Network, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm speaking in part of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. It is of utmost importance that the Global Biodiversity Framework and its goals and targets are successfully implemented. To ensure this, comprehensive and constructive mechanism for reporting and reviewing that are inclusive and participatory need to be in place. In this context, Gibbon would like to emphasize that we consider NBSAPs as the main tool for implementation on the national level. These must be standardized in order to have comparable results when it comes to analyzing the progress of the implementation. While we welcome commitments from parties and non-state actors, we are concerned that they could potentially undermine or weaken NBSAPs. Therefore, we strongly urge parties to ensure that such commitments are being closely aligned with the NBSAP system. Furthermore, we believe that reporting needs to be constructive and used to improve implementation over time. If reports show little or negative progress, constructive feedback should be provided and measures need to be taken to support parties to overcome obstacles. We would also like to raise the following comments on this agenda item. Adequate reporting requires sufficient resource mobilization, training, and time. High-quality monitoring of the state of biodiversity will need solidarity between parties and joint efforts to enable every country to contribute. Reporting frameworks must be standardized and be globally comparable in order to be able to identify global obstacles and trends quickly enough to intervene when needed. Furthermore, reporting framework must be harmonized across biodiversity-related conventions, so reporting can be done more easily and in a more holistic manner in line with the outcomes of the recent second Bern workshop. We believe that it is important that the reporting frameworks capture diverse sets of data, including community-based monitoring and indicators for traditional knowledge, as well as data on enabling conditions and participation of stakeholders. We believe that a good monitoring and reporting framework should ensure the full participation of stakeholders, such as youth, women, and IPLCs. This should be done through several actions. First, formal and informal consultation processes for reporting. Second, the systematic and transparent gathering of disaggregated data on the contributions of relevant stakeholders to national commitments and targets with our full and effective participation. And third, by putting in place accessible and transparent mechanisms for stakeholders to comment on national reports. Gibbon also welcomes the positive outcomes of the voluntary peer review mechanism conducted so far. We feel that peer reviewing is not just an excellent tool to measure progress, but it can also help to promote dialogue, exchange of experiences, and lessons learned. We therefore call upon all parties to make use of the benefits of peer reviewing and to expand this tool much further to actively involve stakeholders, including youth, in such reviewing processes. Gibbon also welcomes the creation of the open-ended forum on implementation and urges parties to make this forum permanent, while ensuring the full and effective participation of major stakeholder groups, including youth. Madam Chair, we hope these comments will be taken into account to develop a more effective and constructive report mechanism. Finally, as youth, we want to remind you that we don't get another chance. In the coming 10 years, we need to get this right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Tack så mycket. Thank you very much. I now continue with behalf of the CBD Alliance, NGO Pro Natura. You have the floor.
Views and proposals from civil society. The often used phrase, the Aichi targets have failed, seems to justify spending time and energy on a new and better set of targets for a post-2020 global biodiversity framework. However, the Aichi targets' failure is not rooted in the targets themselves, but in their lack of implementation. A new global biodiversity framework will fail in the same way if the implementation of the CBD is not substantially improved. If the new global biodiversity framework will be the basis on which progress on implementation is measured, it needs to include all aspects of the CBD so that no targets or indicators run counter to the CBD's objectives. This is not yet the case. Parties to the CBD have unmet international obligations, such as those in the Convention's Articles 3, 4b, 7c, and 8l, which oblige parties to ensure that activities within their jurisdiction or control do not cause damage to the environment of other states. Industrialized countries must take measures to curb consumption that wreaks havoc for the biodiversity of other, often poorer countries. According to Article 2 of the Convention, sustainable use needs to ensure that the use of biodiversity does not lead to its long-term decline, which is not at all ensured if we measure it against the amount of benefits and products they provide, as currently suggested in the updated Zero Draft and the Substar Draft on indicators. The post-2020 goals and targets must be in full compliance with these CBD obligations. But just as importantly, a robust, transparent and inclusive reporting, assessment and review mechanism must be implemented together with the GBF. It should include, firstly, standardized NBSAPs on the basis of a whole government approach, with a structure in line with that of the GBF, putting into action all obligations under the CBD. Secondly, standardized and synchronized reporting and comparable landmarks. Thirdly, transparency on how parties measure up to these landmarks, applicable for their specific situation, so that reporting does not become an unbearable task for developing country parties. There should be commensurate provision of resources in accordance with Article 20. Fourth, in case of non-compliance, reporting should also explain the reasons for not achieving the parties' obligations, considering the reasons for non-compliance by the developing country parties and providing the support they may need. Fifth, the process must be participatory, inclusive, and equitable for developing countries and representative at national level, and enable non-state actors, IPLCs, and civil society to report on the actions taken to implement the framework and integrate their inputs to the national reports. Review should be mandatory, understanding it is an opportunity to take stock and present the national situation, share experiences, and discuss with peers on how to solve challenges while catalyzing action. We welcome the country-by-country review processes as they allow for analysis at the same level as concrete decisions are taken. Seventh, ensure that cross-cutting aspects of the GBF, especially a rights-based approach, intergenerational equity, gender equity and equality, recognition of IPLC's rights, and other effective actions on enabling conditions for the implementation of the framework are also duly reported, assessed, and reviewed. On the proposal and options for an enhanced planning, reporting, and review mechanism contained in document 3/11, we do have concerns about the role of commitments. Are these national targets that a country strives to achieve, or are these actions parties will undertake in order to achieve the obligations of the CBD and the GBF? How do they relate to the national biodiversity strategies and action plans? Are they mandatory? They should be. And they should be globally commensurate with the achievement of the CBD goals and targets set out in the GBF. We understand that countries present their actions and efforts undertaken in the national reports. However, as the state of biodiversity is still getting worse, we need to see how these relate to the parties' achievement of the CBD and the goals and targets of the post-2020 framework. We need standardized and synchronized assessments of the state of biodiversity in each country, of the national gaps towards the goals and targets of the CBD and the post-2020 framework, and ambitious action to be taken as a result. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And finally, on my list for major stakeholders, on behalf of some national and local governments, Aichi Prefecture, you have the floor.
Thank you. Honorable chairs, co-chairs, and distinguished delegates, I'm taking the floor on behalf of the Advisory Committee on Subnational Government, coordinated by Region 4 and the Government of Quebec, ICREI, the group of leading subnational government toward biodiversity target, the European Committee of the Regions, and the Edinburgh Process partners. We'd like to reiterate the important role that subnational government, cities, and local authorities play in conservation of biodiversity, and to recognize their contribution in planning, monitoring, reporting, and reviewing the convention. In this regard, we'd like to take this opportunity to officially reply to the co-chair's questions on the involvement of subnational government under this item. A great step toward a mainstreaming approach would be to encourage subnational and local governments to adopt commitment at their level. In this regard, we believe that the action agenda for nature and people should strengthen linkages with the City with Nature online platform to foster engagement and reporting commitment by subnational and local governments to the post-2020 GBF. Subnational and local BSAP could be the tool used to identify our contribution to the global target. In addition, specific templates and guidance would be welcome for subnational and local BSAPs and for sharing reports on these commitments. Those reports could be shared through their national governments or independently via an online tool that could be developed with the provision of adequate support. Opportunities to increase engagement of subnational governments, cities, and local authorities and to enhance linkages with other processes and conventions, including the SDGs and the UNFCCC, should also be provided. Nevertheless, our constituency recognizes that this process should minimize reporting burden and encourage actions. Finally, to build back better and redesign our shared future in harmony with nature, we encourage all parties to adopt a whole-of-government approach by recognizing the important contribution of all levels of government, including subnational, at every step of the implementation of the global post-2020 GBF. We look forward to discussing these points further and continuing the good work together. Thank you.
Thank you. And this completes my list of major stakeholders. Dear colleagues, I will now continue like follows. I will now give the floor to the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Then I would like to give the floor for Bosnia, who couldn't speak earlier because of technical difficulties. I will then close this agenda item. And for those observers that have not yet been able to speak, if you have agreed to make your statement public, they will be posted online. I'm sorry, but we need to continue with our discussions. So I will now give the floor to World Business Council for Sustainable Development, followed by Bosnia. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm giving this statement on behalf of the Business for Nature Coalition. Business for Nature thanks the efforts of parties to develop a strong post-2020 framework. We have produced a position on the updated Zero draft that includes 9 concrete suggestions and text amendments to strengthen the ambition of the framework. This position is available on our website. According to the World Economic Forum, over half of the world's GDP is at moderate or severe risk due to nature loss. Therefore, the adoption of a strong post-2020 global biodiversity framework is not only a moral imperative, but also an economic one. But this is only possible if the framework is implemented and enforced at all levels. We need to ensure a level playing field for businesses, promoting faster and strong actions from progressive companies and pushing laggards to act and transform their business model. The mechanism currently proposed in the updated Zero draft must be strengthened to close the implementation gap. We would therefore like to make 3 suggestions. First, the NBSAP should continue to be the main planning tool for national implementation. However, it should be strengthened to incorporate and incentivize the participation of non-state actors, including businesses, through the development, implementation, and reporting on national plans for all productive sectors to reduce by at least 50% the production footprint. Second, a ratcheting process should be introduced for parties to ramp up the implementation. This would demonstrate to businesses that policies will continue to increase and thereby incentivize companies to act faster. And thirdly, an effective, comprehensive, and cyclical implementation mechanism should be established, including the following 3 components. First, as soon as possible, parties should translate the Global Biodiversity Framework's objectives into relevant national and regional planning processes, including strengthened NBSAPs. By 2024, parties should review the progress made in implementing this framework, and by 2026, ramp up the delivery of plans and actions at the national and regional level. This 4-year cycle will repeat itself. Business for Nature remains available to work with all parties. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I would now like to give the floor to Bosnia, who couldn't speak earlier because of technical difficulties. Bosnia, could you please raise your hand? Yes, Bosnia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me opportunity to speak. Bosnia and Herzegovina thanks the Secretariat for the document prepared on this agenda item. Bosnia and Herzegovina welcomes the development of multidimensional approach in planning, monitoring, reporting, and reviewing the implementation of the Convention in the post-2020 period. We are aware of the need for global and national strengthening of all elements of this process. In this regard, we welcome the efforts to make reporting easier through proposed templates so that progress towards common goals is comparable and credible. However, we want to emphasize the specifics of the current situation. A pandemic is already having a huge impact on the timing of activities. Therefore, in the remaining time, it is necessary to efficiently but carefully plan and design the process of national and global planning, reporting, monitoring, and review of the implementation. We would like to point out that in previous cycle, Bosnia and Herzegovina, probably some other countries, was in conflicting situation between the obligation to follow the timeline in accordance with decisions of Convention and national circumstances important for planning and adoption of NDC. In this sense, and also in connection with the delay in support, at one point, the country was conducting a consultative process to identify national goals and preparing a progress report on the same goal. From the documents and recommendations to COP15 prepared for this agenda item, we see the same situation. The preparation of 7th national report, which should include the report on progress towards GBF goals, is proposed simultaneously with the process of NDSAP revision and adoption as a policy instrument. We believe that there must be a necessary time lag between setting goals and reporting on the progress towards them. As far as we understand the proposed concept of national contributions, this process, as well as NDSAP revision, will require a national consultation. Therefore, we believe that it would be much more efficient to combine the revision of NDSAP with elements of national commitments in time before COP16. Only in this case, the 7th national reports can serve as a good basis for global stocktake and midterm review in time of COP17. As has been pointed out many times, we need to learn from our experience. In this regard, it is necessary, first and above all, to provide the necessary international assistance in a timely manner. Thank you again, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor.
Thank you, Bosnia and Herzegovina. And thank you, delegates, for sharing your views. As I said, I will now close this agenda item. All observers who have not had a chance to speak, your statements will be posted online if you have agreed for your statements to be made public. Distinguished delegates, this brings us to the end of our consideration of agenda item 9. As previously explained, there will be no conference room papers stemming from this informal session. Together with the Secretariat, I will prepare a short procedural report on the informal session, noting the parties and observers that have made interventions. I now invite you to consider agenda item 11 on mainstreaming of biodiversity within and across sectors and other strategic actions to enhance implementation. I invite the Secretariat to introduce the documents on item 11. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mrs. Chair. To support the deliberations of the subsidiary body on item 11, the Executive Secretary has prepared document CBD/SBI/3/13 and its addendum CBD/SBI/3/13 add 1. The document SBI-3/13 summarizes the activities and outputs of the Informal Advisory Group on Mainstreaming, explains the structure of the proposed long-term approach for mainstreaming biodiversity, reports on progress on other elements relevant to this agenda item, and provides draft text of a recommendation for consideration by SBI. Annex 2 presents the proposed long-term approach to mainstreaming prepared by the Informal Advisory Group. And Annex 1 contains recommendations of the Informal Group on how to strengthen linkages between this approach and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Document SBI-3/13/add1 provides an action plan for the proposed long-term approach for mainstreaming, comprising an indicative catalog of activities as a complement to the long-term approach. Information document SBI/3-INF/21 provides a compilation of relevant sources of information offered by the Informal Group and an extended network of experts related to the action plan, and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN has provided updates on its contribution to the Convention on this and related items as CBD/SBI-3/INF/6. In addition, Madam Chair, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland has made a submission for the consideration of the third meeting of the subsidiary body under item 11 of this agenda. This relates to the engagement of subnational governments, cities, and other local authorities and the outcomes of the so-called Edinburgh process, which has been led by the Scottish Government. On this basis, the Executive Secretary has prepared document CBD/SBI/3/19 that compiles the key elements of the submission, which includes a draft recommendation on engagement with subnational governments, cities, and other local authorities to enhance the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, prepared by the Scottish Government and the partners in the Edinburgh process. Two information documents, 25 and 26, provide additional information on this, the Edinburgh Declaration, and a report on the development of the process, as shown in the projected slide. Thank you, Mrs. Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. Distinguished delegates, I would now like to invite the Chair of Informal Advisory Group on Mainstreaming Biodiversity, Ms. Teresa Mundita Lim of the Philippines, to address the meeting. Ms. Lim, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Madam Chair, as a member of the Informal Advisory Group constituted through Decision 14/3 to assist in the development of a long-term approach in support of the Global Biodiversity Framework, please allow me to reiterate the importance of mainstreaming as the key to achieving the goals that will be set out in the GBF. I would also like to highlight the remarkable efforts of the finance and private sector and of society in general, globally and across so many other sectors, into mobilizing support for nature-based solutions towards a sustainable economy. Never has it been as necessary, timely, and feasible as now to involve at all levels development agencies, central banks, and other relevant economic and financial sectors, as well as the UN and the international community in general, in mainstreaming ecosystem services into our economic recovery efforts. It is worth recalling that the proposed structure and references offered in the documents introduced by the Secretariat benefited from the contributions and experiences not only of the 30-member Informal Advisory Group, in which 15 parties collaborated with 15 organizations across all fields of knowledge, but also from over 35 additional organizations in an extended consultative network. The long-term approach to be examined in SBI-3 is articulated around 5 main headline areas according to the main goals and players involved. First, it emphasizes mainstreaming across all areas and levels of governance and ensuring harmonization of policies and programs. Second, it focuses on budgeting and incentives. Third, the long-term approach encourages full involvement and engagement of the economic sectors. Fourth, it brings attention to the finance sector as a cross-cutting area. And fifth, it calls for the empowerment and participation of all sectors of society with special attention to rights and shareholders. In addition, the IAG proposed a series of activities that provides a menu of actions for each party or partners to choose from, aligned with these 5 headline activities. Thus, the action plan offered as an addendum to the long-term approach provides further opportunities to complement the GBF on the practical level. Madam Chair, as the most transformative of the components of the GBF, we would like to see mainstreaming to be explicitly recognized at a higher level in its theory of change as a means of implementation. This is consistent with the IAG's recommendation as already expressed in the report to the OEWG2 and in the pertinent documents that were recently released, such as the Dasgupta Review and the position on the zero draft of the post-2020 GBF of the Business for Nature Coalition under the World Economic Forum. Recommendations in this direction are made in the proposed text of SBI-3/13. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Lim. Distinguished delegates, I would now like to invite the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland to make an introduction to the submission received from the Minister of State concerning the engagement of some national governments, cities and other local authorities and the outcomes of the Edinburgh process. United Kingdom, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, distinguished delegates. I trust you can all hear me. I'm very pleased to provide, thank you, I'm very pleased to provide this introduction to document CBD/SBI/3/19, which arises from a submission by the UK Government for consideration under this agenda item. The document describes the outcome of the Edinburgh process, which was an online global engagement and consultation for subnational, regional and local stakeholders led by the Scottish Government and as agreed at Open-Ended Working Group 1 in Nairobi. The document recommends a new COP decision on the engagement of subnational governments, cities and other local authorities and an update to the plan of action for subnational governments, cities and other local authorities as endorsed by the COP in Decision 1022. The Edinburgh process collected the views of subnational authorities on the post-2020 framework and undertook a consultation on Decision 1022. That consultation tested the level of understanding and familiarity with the subnational plan of action, and we obtained views on whether it needed to be updated for the next decade. The outcomes of our consultation are outlined in an information document, Inf 26, and identified that whilst progress has been made in implementing the plan of action, there is considerable scope for improvement and pointing to the need for a renewed plan of action. Reflecting upon the consultation, Edinburgh process partners have therefore drafted a revised plan of action and an associated draft decision for consideration by parties. These are set out in the draft recommendation as submitted to SBI by the United Kingdom. Madam Chair, if the 2030 mission is to be achieved, it will be essential to involve all levels of government and society in its implementation. This is already outlined in the draft framework and the proposed plan of action clearly sets out how that could be achieved. The Edinburgh Declaration, which is outlined in Inf 25, sets out the political commitment of subnational authorities to continue to take action and to commit resources to ensure implementation of the post-2020 framework. These commitments resonate with the draft long-term approach to mainstreaming. The declaration also calls upon parties to work more effectively and consciously across all levels of government and to adopt the updated subnational plan of action at COP15 in Kunming. The Edinburgh Declaration will remain open for signature and support up until COP15. To date, it's received 132 signatures, including 115 from subnational governments and local authorities from around the world, and I will attach that list of signatures to my written statement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, United Kingdom. I now invite delegates to take the floor on agenda item 11, mainstreaming of biodiversity within and across sectors and other strategic actions to enhance implementation. Delegates, given the time constraint we face, I kindly request delegations to combine their views on the mainstreaming of biodiversity and the engagement of some national and local governments within a single statement. I thank you for your understanding. I will start with open the floor for statements from regions. I think for the African region, I understand that Morocco will speak. Could you please raise your hand? Morocco, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I also would like to particularly thank the interpreters working into French for their excellent work. Morocco will be presenting for the African group. The African group takes note of document CBD/SBI/3/13 and commends the Secretariat for the undeniable value and relevance of the content and the spirit of this groundwork. There is no doubt that the integration of biodiversity and ecosystem services into policies and actions at different levels remains not only primordial, but vital for the African continent. In this regard, it should be recalled that the African Summit on Biodiversity, held just before COP14, had identified Africa's various priorities on biodiversity, including the integration of biodiversity in relevant sectors. The African group stressed at the last COP14 the importance of examining the effectiveness of biodiversity integration and, as well, the need to identify obstacles, pitfalls, and difficulties that hinder it. In this vein, our group stressed the need for capacity building, technology transfer, mobilization, and provision of appropriate financial resources, including through existing bilateral, regional, and multilateral mechanisms. Madam Chair, today the African group can only welcome the development, finally, of the long-term strategic approach for the integration of biodiversity within and across sectors, an approach that will undoubtedly undertake relevant actions to more effectively integrate biodiversity within and across sectors and thereby facilitate intersectoral coordination. Africa would like to commend the Secretariat and the Informal Advisory Group on mainstreaming for their insight and the quality of their work, which is clearly reflected in the documents mentioned above, as well as regards the strategic approach and the action plan for the long-term approach to mainstreaming biodiversity, which are very clearly reflected. However, it must be admitted that the implementation of such a long-term strategic approach inevitably calls for the mobilization of the various actors of the administration, most certainly, but also of private companies and all of civil society with its various components. And of course, requires sufficient financial resources. The proposed approach also requires a long-term communications plan to achieve this timeline. This plan must target all biodiversity stakeholders and those in other sectors without forgetting, obviously, local communities. On another level, it must be said that the implementation of capacity building measures needs to be more detailed than what is foreseen in the current draft action plan. Madam Chair, the success of the long-term approach to mainstreaming biodiversity requires all of us to achieve the goal of greater synergy between the three Rio Conventions on the one hand, and between the CBD and other international agreements dealing with biodiversity on the other. It also calls for full alignment with Sustainable Development Objects. The African Group supports the continuation of the work of the Informal Advisory Group, whose terms of reference are established in accordance with Decision 14/3. This continuation should aim in particular to monitor and review the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework in relation to the mainstreaming approach. 2, reach out to a wider group of organizations and partners to regularly take stock of the implementation of the long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming biodiversity. And finally, monitor and analyze progress in the implementation of the strategic approach and prepare a regular compilation of national experiences in mainstreaming biodiversity within and across sectors. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry that I went over time.
I now see in my list, since it's so late in Asia, I would like to ask if the Philippines will speak for the ASEAN group first, and then we continue with the list. Philippines, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Philippines is pleased to make this statement on behalf of the 10 ASEAN member states that comprise the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or the ASEAN. The ASEAN member states note the proposed long-term approach to biodiversity mainstreaming provided in Annex 2 of document SBI-3/13. We underscore August 2019 submission to the OEWG, which contains suggestions that can fit within the various strategy areas in this proposed long-term approach. In June 2019 in Bangkok, Thailand, the ASEAN leaders agreed to continue to promote biodiversity conservation and management and endeavor to mainstream biodiversity into the various development processes in ASEAN through the ASEAN member states' concerted efforts with the support of the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity. A year later, at the 36th ASEAN Summit in June 2020 in Hanoi, Vietnam, the ASEAN leaders reaffirmed the ASEAN's commitment to promote biodiversity conservation and mainstream biodiversity across other sectors. On the same occasion, the chairman's statement recognized biodiversity conservation as a cross-cutting concern in the region. Indeed, the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework refers to mainstreaming biodiversity across relevant sectors, while encouraging biodiversity literacy, adopt behaviors that address the root causes of future pandemics. Promoting mainstreaming in the region has started even earlier. Back in 2018, a health and biodiversity workshop was organized in Manila, Philippines, with the support of ACB, the CBD Secretariat, World Health Organization, and the United Nations International Institute for Global Health. The workshop identified some thematic areas of collaboration in the ASEAN, such as traditional medicine and nutrition, healthy lifestyles and aging, and zoonotic and emerging diseases. These outcomes serve to strengthen the foundation for a One Health approach at the regional level. Other efforts are ongoing in ASEAN. A workshop on mainstreaming of biodiversity in sustainable tourism, infrastructure, and banking and finance was conducted in October 2018. Mainstreaming was also promoted during the session at the Asia Pacific Congress of Landscape Architects in November 2019. At the onset of the pandemic in 2020, the ASEAN adopted more innovative ways to promote biodiversity mainstreaming by bringing together various sectoral bodies in the region through numerous online discussions. Aside from follow-ups on biodiversity and human health, particularly on the prevention of future pandemics, webinars on the link of biodiversity with agriculture as well as with climate change were also organized. A series of virtual dialogue was also held to give the region's youth a platform to discuss interrelated areas of concern, including biodiversity, disaster risk management, and the youth's crucial contribution to building back better. Moreover, two separate webinars that featured mainstreaming and transformative change, respectively, were part of the ASEAN Conference on Biodiversity 2020 that Malaysia is hosting. More online activities are being organized this year to strengthen biodiversity mainstreaming and cross-sectoral collaboration. This and many other initiatives on mainstreaming biodiversity demonstrate the ASEAN's serious efforts in adopting a whole-of-community approach to fulfilling the objectives of the CBD in recovering from the pandemic and attaining sustainable development in the region. It is with this perspective that the ASEAN looks forward to the discussion on the draft action plan to ensure that the long-term approach to the mainstreaming of biodiversity will reinforce the ASEAN's ongoing interventions. That would be all, Madam Chair, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Philippines, on behalf of ASEAN countries. Distinguished delegates, it's now exactly 10 a.m. Montreal time, and I would like to bring this session for a close for today. Tomorrow, we'll continue with regional statements. Thank you all for all interesting interventions today, and see you all tomorrow. The meeting is...
May I just add one thing, please?
Yes,
Sorry.
please. Secretary.
I just wanted to remind everyone that you could check your mics before the meeting every day in the morning. You know, we started 1 hour earlier, and it might be good if you could check your mics, microphones, headphones, and how they are interacting with the system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretariat. And I'm looking forward to see you all tomorrow. The meeting is adjourned.